Canada, a country with rising crime rates, with rising rent prices, with rising inflation, with rising food prices, with a porous border that we don't necessarily control on our own. We have a government that tabled a budget that was $20 billion over the projection of $40 billion and effectively no sitting government. So, of course, the corporate media wants to talk about Donald Trump. Welcome to the Canadian Shield. My name is Sterling, and I'm your host. For those of you that are not remembering, the last thing that this Liberal government did before it closed for the session that should have begun a new session already was table a budget that was $61 billion over its projected expenditure. $61 billion. The corporate media is not talking about that. The government then prorogued Parliament so that it could get its own house in order, so that it could take the time to do its own personal house cleaning, meanwhile leaving the Canadian people in the lurch. The corporate media doesn't want to talk about that. Donald Trump, however, becomes a great distraction from all of this truth. And that's what we should not be permitting these corporate media outlets to do. Remember that there are laws put in place by the far-left Liberal NDP that limit the amount of access other media organizations have to our airwaves. And when you do that and then begin to send only the same message through the same 3 or 4 corporate media structures, it begins to look a lot like government messaging. And of course, getting a hold of some snippet from Donald Trump is all they really need to try and convince you that they're still doing their jobs, but they're not doing the job that is going to impact you. They're only going to do the job that may be impacting people that were going to go against them. And a great example, of course, is how they can take Pierre Poilievre and try to compare him to Donald Trump because the far left is obsessed with the United States. They don't seem to care anything about Canada. They just want to call Canada, they just want everybody in Canada to be thinking about the United States government and not Canada's government, which is why they call it a distraction, which is what it all is. Donald Trump made 200 executive orders on his very first day. One of them was to declare that the United States government will no longer see anything other than 2 genders. Well, as I'm sure you can imagine, that's the only question Pierre Poilievre is being asked. He's not being asked about housing. He's not being asked about, the economy. No. What do you think about Donald Trump? And what do you think about, and it's like, okay, bud, if you want to talk about Donald Trump, maybe you should resign your post from the CBC, CTV global news stations and go work for an American newspaper. Go work for an American media outlet. Or better yet, why don't you just let the American outlets broadcast into the Canadian airwaves, and then we can at least get something close to facts. And if we want to talk about Donald Trump, we could at least watch it on a station that is rooted in the United States, instead of the Canadian press always seeming to want to talk more about the American president than they do about the Canadian prime ministers. Pierre Poilievre, trying his best to reach the Canadian population, went on CP24, and of course there was no denying that the guy was going to ask him a question about Donald Trump. Not just one question, but I've only kept one question for this particular video because it's about gender. It's like a 2-minute clip that I want to play in its fullness so that you can appreciate the tenor, so that you can appreciate the flow of the conversation, so that you can hear when each one of them may be talking over one another.
All right, let's go back to D.C. right now. Obviously, on his first day on the job, President Trump signed an executive order, the U.S. government only recognizing 2 genders, male, female. They're unchangeable. If elected as prime minister, is that something that you're going to kind of walk in line with, or what are your feelings on that executive order?
Well, I don't know. Do you have any other genders that you'd like to name?
Me personally?
Yes.
I'm just asking more so if you're in line with what he is saying. Do you agree with what he's saying? Is that something that you would be lockstep with if elected as prime minister?
Well, I'm not aware of any other genders than men and women. I mean, if you have any other that you want me to consider, you're welcome to tell me right now.
Well, there's personally, I am a man. I am a, as
Okay.
people will say, cis man.
That's good.
There
That's
are
good.
people there who, they say they're
Me too.
gender
I'm a man
neutral.
as well.
You are a man.
Totally.
Yes. There are people there who say they're
have something in
gender
common.
neutral. Yeah, they say they're gender neutral. They're a trans person. Is that something that you would recognize here, whereas in the States, at least with their U.S. government, the way they're seeing it, there's only two?
I'm only aware of two, but I mean, if you come up with another list, then you're welcome to do that. But I'm aware of two, and as far as I'm concerned, we should have a government that just minds its own damn business and leaves people alone to make their own personal decisions. That's the kind of government I'm going to run.
And with that, the current government, they currently have passports that allow people to put on, gender neutral on their passport. Advocate groups want the government, mind you, the outgoing government, to ask the U.S., would the U.S. recognize these passports, obviously on their way out, if you are the next prime minister? Is that something that you would advocate for?
I have to be honest.
Yeah.
I have to be honest with you. I just saw your segment on homeless encampments that are popping up all over Toronto. We've got 25% of our population in poverty. Housing costs have doubled. Crime is rampaging through our streets. I just find it to be a strange priority to spend time talking about this. My priority is to give people back control of their lives, bring back Canada's promise that anyone who works hard gets a powerful paycheck and pension that buys affordable food, gas, and homes in safe neighborhoods. That's the promise we need for Canadians. If Liberals want to talk about different labels for gender that they want to put on passports in the United States, they can do that. I'm going to talk about the things that will bring home Canada's promise.
Oh, that was great. I think that was just great. If I owned CP24, I would be, talking about relooking at that guy's contract. Whether or not he had the questions running up on the teleprompter or whether or not he had a free flow, somebody needs to realize that Pierre Poilievre answered the question twice, then took control of the conversation and destroyed the narrative coming out of the far left CP24 in under 60 seconds. He was asked about Trump's position on gender. He said that I am only aware of two. Then the guy asked him again, and he said, I am only aware of two, but if you know of more, just submit the list to me, and I will certainly take a look at that. And otherwise, I think that we shouldn't be involving ourselves to that micro level in people's lives, which is something, of course, that the far left cannot withstand. They feel that they have the right to know how many of your hair might have fallen out overnight. They want to know every aspect of your life, because if they don't have that, they don't have that control that they thrive on. They don't want you to tell them how to live or how to think or how to feel, but they definitely and absolutely need to be able to do that to you. It's one of those, don't ask from me that what I will demand from you, which I suppose is a different video. In this one, I just want to point to how Pierre Poilievre artfully and masterfully shut down the conversation and didn't have to avoid answering it. He answered directly. I only believe in two genders, but if you know where there's others, just let me know and I will have a look at it, which is an interesting position, because when we talk about climate change, the far left screams, I believe the science, I believe the science, I believe the science. However, when we talk about gender, they say the science is incorrect. They say everything is incorrect. Now, I don't want to necessarily take this video into that sort of debate, but I do want to point out how Pierre Poilievre did not avoid answering the question. And that is important, because there can be no denying that he answered the question. If we were to give this same question to Chrystia Freeland, we'd give the same question to any of 100 politicians, how many of them would have dodged and weaved and attempted to change the subject, or simply ignore the question and submit their entire different answer all by their own and pretend like that's exactly the question they were asked? And so if you're out there on the fence, if you're out there wondering in your mind which way you should lean, should you go conservative or should you try to stick with your far left and go NDP, remember that honesty will save you a lot more than ideology. Ideology is what's gotten us into this mess. Pierre Poilievre said, look, we're talking about homelessness. We got poverty up through the roof, and all you want to do is try to corner me on gender, which in his mind, I'm guessing he would have been thinking, I've already answered the question. So let's ask me something about the issues that are going on. Let's ask me something about the government, the liberal government that has destroyed so much of this country, instead of asking me about passports, which has got to be so far down our list of concerns. And he was completely shut right down, which I just want to point to again, how without a script, on his feet, in the moment, he shuts down reporter, journalist after journalist after journalist, attack the hostile government, or the hostile corporate media coming after him, and he closes them down one after another, after another, after another. So you can say whatever you want. They can try to slam him all you want, but the proof is in the pudding. Here's a guy who can think on his feet. And if you measure that up against, say, Freeland or Trudeau or Carney or any of them, they all seem to have prepared answers. They never face a hostile press. And when you're in a bad way, when your country is in a way that you need a leader, do you want a leader that can think on his feet, or do you want a leader that gets frozen in place until somebody else tells them what to do, say, or think? Be smart with your vote, because it's important. I'm going to wrap here. I want to thank you for listening. I'll talk to you next time.